I thought I had faded from the world, that if I vanished tomorrow, not a single soul would notice. Then, in the middle of a cold, quiet rain, he came. A little dog soaked to the bone, trembling, yet gentle. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He simply walked over and laid his head on my knee. No words, just presence. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. If this moment touched you even a little, please like and subscribe. Stay with us. This story may remind you that even the smallest kindness can change a life. The town of Willowbrook in northern Oregon was the kind of place that always felt like it had just finished crying. The air carried the scent of wet cedar and earth, and the sky wore shades of gray more often than not. On this particular afternoon, the clouds hung low like heavy thoughts, and a steady cold rain drizzled over the quiet town. People had retreated indoors, leaving the streets empty save for the slow glide of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional flicker of movement behind glowing windows. Eleanor Grace sat alone on a worn wooden bench at the edge of Alderwood Park. She was 78 years old, her frame fragile but upright, wrapped in a gray wool coat that had outlasted too many winters. Her hair, a soft and cloud-like white, was tied into a loose bun at the nape of her neck. In her lap, protected under a plastic sleeve, rested a black and white photograph. The edges were frayed and the ink had begun to fade, but the image was clear enough. A younger Eleanor, her husband Harold, and their only son David, smiling in a moment long gone. Harold had died 10 years earlier. It was quiet, unexpected, and left behind a silence Eleanor never truly filled. David had moved to the city 5 years after that. At first, he called, sent postcards, even promised to visit on the holidays. But over time, the rhythm of city life, loud and constant, had pulled him further away. The calls became rare, then stopped. Not because he didn't care, but because life got loud and she got quiet. Eleanor didn't cry anymore. Grief after enough time doesn't announce itself in sobs. It arrives in stillness, in forgetting why you walked into a room, or letting the mailbox overflow because you don't expect anything real. She came to the park most days, not for any reason in particular, but because the bench was there and the trees didn't ask her questions. Today, like most days, she sat with the photo, her gloved hands trembling only slightly from the cold. She stared out at the rain-soaked trees, the empty path, the puddles rippling with every drop from above. And then she heard it, soft, uncertain footsteps on the wet gravel. Not the heavy stomp of a passerby, nor the hurried skitter of squirrels. It was lighter, more deliberate. She turned her head. A small dog was walking toward her. He was golden, though dulled by mud and rain, his fur clinging to his body in damp waves. His legs were thin, his ribs faintly visible, and his eyes, dark almond-shaped, looked straight into hers with a strange kind of knowing. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He approached slowly, cautiously, ears slightly back, tail low, but not tucked. Eleanor didn't move. She barely breathed. The dog stopped just a foot from her boots. Then, with a gentleness that struck her like a memory, he leaned forward and rested his soaked head right on her knee. A pause. A silence deeper than the rain. Eleanor blinked, her breath caught. She looked down at the dog, this small, shivering creature, and slowly reached out a gloved hand to touch his head. He didn't flinch. His fur was cold, wet, and soft. Her hand moved in slow, careful strokes, as if she was afraid she might break the moment. "You poor thing," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. She glanced around the park, empty. No leash, no collar, no signs of an owner calling out. Just the sound of rain and the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing as he stayed close to her leg, eyes closed now, trusting. Eleanor sat like that for several minutes, petting a dog she'd never seen before, letting the weight of him press gently against her loneliness. And in that moment, something stirred inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Connection. When the wind began to pick up, tugging at her coat, she finally spoke again. "Let's go," she said quietly. The dog lifted his head, blinked up at her, and stood. She rose carefully from the bench, her knees stiff, and began walking toward the park exit. The dog walked beside her, close enough that their bodies brushed now and then. She didn't know why he followed. She didn't question it. Her cottage stood at the edge of Willowbrook, painted pale blue with white trim, though the paint had chipped in several places. The garden out front was wild, overgrown with stubborn rose bushes and moss-covered stones. Eleanor hadn't cared much for tending things in recent years. But now, with the sound of 4 soft paws behind her, she paused at the gate, then opened the door and let the dog inside. He walked slowly into the living room, circled once by the fireplace, and curled up without a sound. Eleanor set her coat on the hook, removed her wet boots, and filled a bowl with warm water. She placed it next to him. He drank not in a frenzy, but as though he trusted there would be more tomorrow. She watched him for a long while before speaking again. "You'll need a name," she said softly. The dog raised his head at her voice, as if understanding. She looked toward the window. Outside, the clouds had begun to lift ever so slightly, and a faint stripe of gold light broke through the gray. She turned back to him. "Sonny," she whispered. "I think I'll call you Sonny." He blinked once, then laid his head back down. That evening, as the fire warmed the room and the rain slowed to a misty whisper, Eleanor sat at her writing desk for the first time in years. She pulled out a notepad, yellowed with age, and a ballpoint pen that still worked. She wrote one sentence today: "I wasn't forgotten." And for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor Gray smiled. The morning after Sonny arrived, Eleanor woke earlier than usual. Her body still ached in familiar places, knees, shoulders, wrists, stiff from years of silence, but something was different. It wasn't the pain that drew her from bed, nor the groan of the old cottage as the wind shifted. It was a sound she hadn't heard in a long time, the gentle rhythmic breathing of something alive, something waiting. Sonny was curled at the foot of her bed, just as he had been the night before. His golden coat had dried into soft waves, and his eyes closed, but twitching slightly suggested the warmth of a dream. Eleanor stared for a moment, not wanting to disturb him. Then she stood, pulling on her cardigan, and walked into the kitchen. She hadn't cooked a proper breakfast in months. Oatmeal with a pinch of cinnamon and toast with apricot jam had been Harold's favorite, and she used to make it daily, until the habit stopped feeling like love and started feeling like ache. But now, with Sonny padding into the kitchen behind her, she found her hands moving instinctively. A pot simmered, toast browned. She even whistled just once. Sonny sat by her feet, tail sweeping slowly across the linoleum. She tore a piece of toast and handed it to him. He took it gently, chewing, with exaggerated care, then looked at her with soft eyes. That look she thought could melt the edge off winter. By mid-morning, the rain had lifted, and rays of filtered light broke through the clouds. Eleanor opened the window over the sink, letting in the cool scent of wet leaves and distant chimneys. She had forgotten how much she used to love that smell. In the afternoon, they went walking. Eleanor hadn't walked beyond her gate in nearly 6 months, not since her hip had flared up, and a neighbor had warned her about falls at her age. But, with Sonny trotting ahead, glancing back every few steps, she found her courage returning. They followed a gravel path behind the cottage that curved past the community lake. Willowbrook Lake wasn't large, but it was framed by tall cypress and weeping willows that mirrored the water like old sentinels. On the second day of walking, she brought a scarf. On the third, she brought a ball. It was on the fourth day that they met the boy. Eleanor had noticed him before, sometimes from her kitchen window, a small figure pacing the edge of the trees behind the trailer homes at the south end of the park. But she had never seen him up close. Sonny, however, saw him first and immediately changed course, trotting toward the tree line, with his tail flicking high. "Sonny, wait!" Eleanor called, her voice catching in her throat. The boy stepped from behind a tree as Sonny approached. He couldn't have been more than 10, maybe 11. Thin, wiry limbs, too long for his oversized hoodie. His jeans were dirty, the knees frayed. He had a mop of chestnut brown hair that fell across his eyes, and his shoes were mismatched, one sneaker, one rubber boot. He looked at the dog, then at Eleanor, then back at the dog. Sonny sat before him, head tilted slightly. The boy didn't speak, neither did Eleanor. Then Sonny did the most unexpected thing. He dropped the ball he had been carrying at the boy's feet and gave a single wag of his tail. The boy blinked. Then slowly he knelt down, picked up the ball, and threw it. It was a weak toss off-center and low, but Sonny raced after it like it was a gift from heaven. The boy's lips twitched. Eleanor took a tentative step closer. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The boy didn't answer at first. He looked down at the ground, rubbing a stick into the dirt with the toe of his boot. "Charlie," he finally mumbled. "Charlie, that's a fine name," she replied. "This here is Sonny." Charlie nodded, eyes still down. They stood in silence, interrupted only by Sonny's panting as he returned ball in mouth, tail swishing. Charlie threw again this time, a little harder. From then on, it became a routine. Every afternoon around 4, Eleanor and Sonny would walk by the lake. Charlie would be there sometimes already, waiting with the ball, sometimes pretending not to be waiting at all. He still didn't say much, but he smiled more. On the 7th day, he laughed when Sonny ran straight into a bush chasing a squirrel. Eleanor found herself watching him, noticing how thin his wrists were, how pale his skin looked under his hoodie. His laughter was quick but brief, like he was unsure he was allowed to enjoy it. One day she asked, "Do your parents know you're here?" Charlie shrugged. "I live with my grandma. She's home, usually sleeping." Eleanor's chest tightened. She didn't push further, not yet. But she understood the language of neglect, how it didn't always scream. Sometimes it just forgot to make breakfast. One afternoon, she brought 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a thermos of hot cocoa. She told herself it was just in case. But when Charlie showed up, pretending to dig in the dirt with a stick, she handed him a sandwich without a word. He accepted it like a wild animal, suspicious but starving. They sat in the grass. Sonny laid between them, his head resting on Eleanor's foot. "You know," she said, "Sonny just showed up one day. No collar, no name. Just walked into my life and stayed." Charlie looked at her. "Mine used to have a dog. Grandma said we couldn't keep it. Why not?" He shrugged. "She said dogs don't belong with people like us." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed gentle. "I think Sonny would disagree." Charlie didn't reply, but he reached out and scratched Sonny's ear, and Sonny leaned into him without hesitation. That night, Eleanor wrote again. "Today I watched a boy remember how to smile. I think Sonny is teaching both of us something we forgot." Autumn deepened its grip on Willowbrook. Leaves curled into shades of rust and gold, carpeting the sidewalks in soft mosaics. The lake path where Eleanor and Sonny walked each day had become quieter, the town slowing into the hush of the approaching cold. Eleanor no longer noticed the ache in her joints as she stepped outside. Something about having purpose, even the quiet purpose of a waiting dog and a boy with tired eyes, seemed to wrap her in warmth that wool couldn't provide. One late afternoon, while Sonny chased fallen leaves and Charlie drew spirals in the dirt with a stick, a young woman stood just beyond the bend in the path, observing them with a tilted head and a notebook pressed to her chest. She wore a beige canvas jacket 2 sizes too large, rolled at the cuffs, and a faded blue beanie that barely tamed her waves of fiery red hair. Slender and tall, with long limbs and a quick focused gaze, the woman looked to be in her early 30s. Her name was Emma Collins, a new volunteer at the Willowbrook Animal Rescue, who had only moved to town 3 weeks prior. She had the sort of energy that stayed just under the surface, gentle but always alert, as though listening for something others had long stopped hearing. Emma had noticed Sonny a week ago while putting up missing pet flyers at the park's notice board. She didn't think much of it at first. Dogs were common enough, even golden retrievers, but there was something unmistakable about the way he moved his gait, the small scar above his right foreleg, the way he sat and waited before crossing a path. She had seen a picture before, from a case file nobody followed up on, a rescue report from a year ago. That afternoon, Emma approached slowly, notebook still in hand. "Excuse me," she called gently. Eleanor looked up from her bench. Sonny, hearing the voice, lifted his head and wagged his tail with one slow sweep. Charlie, startled, stood quickly, stepping a little behind Eleanor. Emma smiled warmly. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I just your dog. Is his name Sonny?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes." Emma stepped closer, crouching beside Sonny. He wagged again, then licked her hand once and sat back calm and still. Emma looked at him for a long second. "Has he been with you long?" "Just a couple weeks," Eleanor replied. Her voice was guarded but not unkind. Emma exhaled, nodding. "I think I know this dog." Eleanor's brow creased. "I volunteer at the rescue center," Emma explained, rising slowly. "Last year there was an accident just outside the county line. A family, husband, wife, little girl. Their car overturned in the canyon. The parents didn't make it, but they had a dog. He disappeared after the crash. We looked, but he was never found." She paused, looking down at Sonny again. "His name was Cooper. Same eyes, same scar on the leg, same habit of sitting before crossing." Eleanor's breath caught. She glanced at Sonny, who now rested his head on Charlie's shoe. The boy hadn't moved. His wide eyes flicked from woman to dog and back again. "I didn't know," Eleanor said softly. Emma shook her head. "No one blames you. Honestly, it's amazing he found someone. Most animals in grief don't rebound like this. But he looks calm with you." Settled, like he's home. Eleanor looked back down at Sonny. He is. There was no debate, no need for one. Emma saw it too. I won't report it, Emma said gently. The rescue's file is cold. No surviving family came looking. If he's found someone, then that's the story I want to leave it with. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. A sadness she didn't know Sonny had been carrying suddenly became hers too. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Before Emma left, she crouched down and whispered something into Sonny's ear. The dog nuzzled her, once then returned to Eleanor's side without hesitation. Emma waved at Charlie, who gave her a shy nod, then disappeared down the trail. That evening, Eleanor sat at her desk again, lit by a single lamp. Her handwriting, once stiff and sparse, had begun to flow like water down a gentle slope. His name used to be Cooper. I wonder if he remembers. I wonder if it matters. We all carry different names through pain, and sometimes we lay them down when we find something better. She closed the notebook and looked across the room, where Sonny lay curled beside the fireplace. His breathing was slow and steady, one paw twitching, as though chasing something in a dream. In the following days, Emma visited again this time, without pretense or clipboard. She brought old blankets and flea spray from the shelter, as well as treats wrapped in paper towels. She had a voice that made children comfortable, and a laugh that was rarely loud, but always sincere. She told stories about the dogs she'd seen come and go, about her own mutt named Raisin, who passed away the year she turned 25. One morning, she and Eleanor had tea on the porch. Charlie, sitting on the steps with Sonny, listened quietly as Emma spoke about loss and beginnings. I think sometimes Emma said animals choose us more than we choose them. Eleanor sipped her tea, then nodded. He walked straight to me. Head down, no asking, just stayed. Charlie turned to look at Sonny. He stayed with me too. Emma smiled. Then you both must be worth staying for. That night, Eleanor wrote again. It was no longer an exercise in habit, but a way of breathing. Today I learned that Sonny had another life, another name. But he chose not to return to it. He chose us instead. And I wonder, maybe we all need someone who lets us start over without asking for the old story. Willowbrook entered November with the hush of a breath held too long. The trees once golden and proud had begun to bare their limbs, shedding leaves like memories onto cracked sidewalks. The air tasted of chimney smoke and damp earth. In the quiet of the neighborhood, the sound of a mailbox creaking open had a kind of music to it, one that Eleanor Grace had grown to anticipate each morning. Rick Carter had been the local postman for over 30 years. A tall man with a lean build and shoulders that stooped from years of carrying weight, both literal and unseen. Rick wore his uniform like a second skin. His gray mustache was always trimmed, and his cap, slightly frayed at the edges, sat tilted on his thinning hair. He spoke with a soft, deliberate tone and walked at a pace that suggested neither hurry nor hesitation. After losing his wife Judith 5 winters ago, to a sudden stroke Rick had folded in on himself. He delivered mail with polite nods and avoided eye contact when he could. He had known Eleanor's husband Harold from their time working together at the old rail depot years ago. But since Harold's death, Rick and Eleanor had only shared brief exchanges, whether condolences, silence. That began to change the week Sonny arrived. The first morning, Sonny had darted to the gate when he heard Rick's slow steps and the rattle of the mailbox. He didn't bark, just sat wagging his tail like he'd been expecting someone. Rick paused, surprised by the golden dog's calm gaze. He bent down, letting the dog sniff his hand, before giving him a slow scratch behind the ears. Friendly fellow? Rick murmured, eyes flicking up toward Eleanor, who stood on the porch, arms folded inside her cardigan. His name's Sonny, she said. He found me. Rick smiled faintly. Seems like a smart one. You two suit each other. Eleanor didn't quite know how to respond, but the silence between them that day felt less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. From then on, Rick lingered, sometimes just a moment longer than needed to hand her a parcel. Other times they'd speak for a few minutes about town gossip, the weather, the state of the roads. Sonny became the glue between their mornings, a quiet, wagging ambassador. One Tuesday, Rick brought her a small, paper-wrapped package. No return address, he said, handing it over. Eleanor unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a jar of homemade apple butter and a note scribbled in block letters. For the woman with the brave heart and the golden dog. She looked up. Rick raised a brow. Anonymous admirers. Eleanor chuckled for the first time in days. Seems we've become a story, Sonny and I. That night she wrote in her journal, "Again, people notice things when love enters quietly. Even the mailman hears the heartbeat of a house." Over the next week, the conversations between her and Rick lengthened. They spoke of their spouses, Judith and Harold, of long winters and lost birthdays, of music once played on vinyl and now rarely played at all. Eleanor learned that Rick had once played the harmonica for local church events, but hadn't touched it since Judith's passing. Rick in turn discovered that Eleanor used to paint landscapes mostly tucked away in a closet now, forgotten and dusty. "You should take it back up," Rick said one morning, placing the mail into her hands. "Colors still live in you, I can see it." Eleanor smiled. "And you should play again." He tipped his cap. "We'll see." Later that week, Sonny and Eleanor made their usual walk to the park, where Charlie was already waiting, a tattered baseball in hand. Charlie had grown bolder, speaking more freely with Eleanor, though still hesitant around strangers. That afternoon, Rick happened to be walking along the same path out of uniform, dressed in a plaid coat and soft wool cap. Charlie stiffened at first, but Rick crouched down to toss the ball for Sonny, without a word. Sonny bounded after it, kicking up leaves. Charlie's tension slowly eased. "You're the mailman," he said cautiously. Rick nodded, guilty. Charlie looked at him. "You gave us the apple butter." Rick gave a half smile. "Maybe." Charlie grinned, then threw the ball again. Rick watched the boy carefully and sat down on the bench beside Eleanor. "He reminds me of my nephew," he said quietly. Quiet, observant. Got lost in his own world when things got loud around him. "Charlie lives with his grandmother," Eleanor said. "She's not well." Rick didn't press. He simply nodded. That night, Eleanor found a small package on her doorstep, wrapped in old newspaper. Inside was a harmonica. Not a new one, but polished clean, with a note that read, "You paint, I play." Deal! Eleanor laughed softly and clutched it to her chest. The next morning, Rick arrived with the mail and whistled a soft tune. Sonny sat at his feet, tail thumping. Eleanor brought out 2 mugs of tea, and they stood under the gray morning sky, sipping in shared silence. That afternoon, Eleanor went to the closet for the first time in years. She pulled out a small canvas cracked at the edges, but still sturdy, and a wooden box of dried paints. She sat on the porch with Sonny curled at her feet and began painting the lake path, 2 figures walking, one tall in a cap, one small with a baseball, and a golden dog running between them. The frost arrived quietly in Willowbrook, dusting rooftops and leafless branches with a delicate shimmer that melted before noon. The days grew shorter, but Eleanor's house seemed to glow longer. Light poured from her kitchen windows in the late afternoons, casting soft golden rectangles onto the porch, where Sonny would nap, with his head on his paws, ears twitching in the breeze. Charlie now visited daily, his footsteps nearly in sync with the chime of the clock at 3. He had begun to knock politely, but still uncertain, before letting himself in when Eleanor called from the kitchen. He never stayed long, at first 20 minutes, sometimes less, but with each visit his stay lengthened like a piece of string unwinding gently. Emma had been the one to suggest he come by the shelter after school. She arranged it quietly, never pressing, simply telling Charlie that there were dogs who needed kindness, and that kindness didn't have to be loud. Charlie had agreed, not with words, but with a small nod. At the shelter, Emma had guided him through the kennels, introducing him to each dog with patience and a smile. She explained their histories in simple language, how some had wandered and others had been left behind. Charlie listened carefully, his hands clasped behind his back. "He's not scared of dogs," Emma later told Eleanor as they sipped tea in the kitchen. "He's scared of being seen." Since then, Sonny had become more than a pet. He was the center of a quiet constellation. Charlie brushed his coat every afternoon with a soft bristle brush Eleanor had found in an old drawer. He fed him small bites of biscuit when Eleanor baked. He sat beside him while Eleanor painted. Sometimes he even spoke. One Thursday, as Eleanor was slicing apples for a pie, Charlie sat at the table, rubbing a smudge of paint off his jeans. "You know," he said quietly, "I never met my real mom." Eleanor stopped slicing for a breath. She turned, giving him her full attention. "My grandma says she was too young, that she couldn't keep me. I used to think she left because I was hard to love." The words hung there raw and unprotected. Eleanor walked over and knelt beside him, her knees creaking. "Charlie," she said gently, "you are not hard to love. Some people leave because they're lost. not because you did anything wrong." He looked down. Sonny, as if sensing the shift in the room, rested his head on Charlie's foot. "I don't remember much," Charlie whispered, "but I remember feeling cold." Eleanor reached for his hand. "You're warm now?" The pie crust that day turned out too thick, the edges lopsided. But no one noticed. They ate it warm with cinnamon and a little too much sugar, the kitchen filled with the kind of silence that doesn't need fixing. As the first snow threatened in the forecast, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She sent invitations. Nothing formal, just handwritten notes tucked into mailboxes. One for Rick, one for Emma, one for Mrs. Langley across the street, who always wore her bathrobe past noon and hummed show tunes under her breath. Another for Mrs. Chan, the widowed librarian, who wore her hair in two tight braids and baked honey cakes on Sundays. "Tea and something sweet," Eleanor wrote. "Come as you are." She expected no more than 2 guests, maybe just Rick. But on Saturday afternoon, her house filled like a mug under a steady pour. Rick arrived first, holding a tin of roasted nuts and wearing a new scarf Eleanor suspected he bought for the occasion. Emma followed with a stray poinsettia and a hug that smelled like peppermint and hay. Mrs. Langley brought deviled eggs. Mrs. Chan arrived last, holding a honey cake wrapped in embroidered linen. Eleanor's kitchen became a mosaic of voices and steam. Sonny wove between legs, accepting pets and scraps with solemn dignity. Charlie, overwhelmed but proud, served tea with both hands, carrying cups to guests like a young steward on a mission. Eleanor baked molasses cookies and put on a dusty record player she hadn't touched in years. Music filled the space, Frank Sinatra slow and warm like syrup. Rick hummed. Emma danced briefly with Charlie, twirling him until he laughed breathlessly. It wasn't loud, it wasn't crowded, but for the first time in what felt like another lifetime, Eleanor's house felt full. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Charlie had fallen asleep on the couch with Sonny curled at his feet, Eleanor stood at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the teacups. Rick appeared beside her, drying each cup with a quiet rhythm. After the last one was shelved, he handed her a folded napkin. From Judith, he said. She wrote it the year before she passed. I found it last week in one of her recipe books. Eleanor unfolded it slowly. It wasn't a recipe. When the heart forgets how to breathe, kindness teaches it again. She looked up. Rick shrugged. I think you've been breathing again, Eleanor. She smiled, not out of politeness, not out of habit. A true rising smile. I think you're right. That night, as snow began to fall softly against the window panes, Eleanor wrote in her journal, Tonight the walls of this house softened. They held laughter and tea and memories that weren't only mine. The boy smiled. The dog napped. And I remembered there is no age at which the heart is too old to be revived. A light snow had fallen overnight, blanketing Willowbrook in a hush that softened even the sharpest corners. The town seemed paused like a page between paragraphs. Eleanor's cottage sat peacefully in the stillness, the warmth inside spilling through the curtained windows. On the mantel above the fireplace stood a row of small, meaningful items, an old teacup from Judith Rick's late wife, a pine cone Charlie had handed her last week without a word, and leaning gently against a framed painting, the cherished black and white photograph of Harold David and herself from decades ago. But the photo wasn't there. Eleanor didn't notice at first. That morning, she fed Sonny boiled tea and waited by the window for Charlie, whose visits had grown as regular as sunrise. When he arrived with flushed cheeks and wet boots, she smiled, motioned him in, and reached for the photo to tell a story, only to find an empty space. Her hand froze midair. She blinked, checked the table, the desk, the drawer near the stairs. Nothing. It must have been yesterday, she whispered. I brought it with me to the park. I wanted to show Emma. Charlie's face stiffened. Do you think it fell? Eleanor sat down slowly, the ache in her knees forgotten. It was the last thing Harold ever gave me. He tucked it into my coat pocket when he knew he wouldn't come home from the hospital. I was going to frame it after Christmas. Charlie didn't say anything at first. Then, without hesitation, he pulled his hood up. I'll go look. Eleanor opened her mouth to stop him. Outside was cold, slippery, too much for a child on his own. But then Sonny barked once already at the door tail alert, and ears perked. Charlie smiled faintly. I won't be alone. He left without waiting for an answer. Charlie zipped his jacket high and trudged through the frosted streets, his breath puffing in small clouds. Sonny padded beside him, nose to the wind body, tense with purpose. They crossed the half-frozen path toward Alderwood Park, where snow lay light over the trails, leaving just enough visibility for the eyes of a determined boy and the nose of a dog who remembered things no human ever could. Charlie didn't talk at first. He scanned the ground, the bushes, the benches. Sonny sniffed carefully, circling the old oak tree where he and Eleanor had first met. Then, out loud to no one in particular, Charlie said, "My mom's name was Lydia." Sonny turned his head tail still. "I never told anyone that before," Charlie went on, voice low. "She left me at the hospital when I was 1. The nurse said she kissed my head before she left. I used to dream I could remember that, but I can't." He stopped walking. "Sonny did too. I found her name once in a letter Grandma threw out. Lydia Harper. That's all I know." Charlie knelt and drew a small shape in the snow with his gloved finger. "Sometimes I wonder if I look like her. If she ever thought about me. I used to hate her. Now I think maybe she was just scared." Sonny nuzzled his arm. Charlie stood again, voice firmer now. "Eleanor's photo matters, like how I have one school picture of me with a birthday hat and cake. I keep it under my mattress. If I lost that, I'd feel like I disappeared." They circled the park twice, then reached the far bench, the one with peeling paint and a crack down the center. It was there, under a layer of wet leaves and slush, that Sonny stopped. He dug gently, and Charlie, eyes wide, dropped to his knees. The photo was there, soggy edges curled but not torn, not broken, not gone. Charlie lifted it as if it were glass, holding it flat between both hands. The faces stared back, slightly blurred, the ink bleeding in tiny strokes but intact. Eleanor young and smiling, holding her son's hand. Harold's arm around both of them. Charlie looked at Sonny. "Let's go home." They returned at sunset. Eleanor was sitting by the fire, a blanket wrapped around her legs. When Charlie stepped in holding the photo wrapped in a dish towel, her breath caught. "I didn't think," she whispered. "We found it," Charlie said, placing it carefully in her hands. "Under the bench." She opened the towel, slowly, eyes filling. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out and pulled him into a hug. It was the kind of embrace that didn't ask permission. One of those rare healing kinds, quiet and firm and lasting. Charlie stiffened only a moment before his arms came around her shoulders. That night, Eleanor framed the photo with trembling hands. The glass wasn't quite clean. The frame had a chip in the corner, but it stood strong. She placed it back on the mantel, now flanked by 2 new things: a pine branch Sonny had dragged in from the park, and a note from Charlie written on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Some things are never really lost. They just wait for us to come back." The air in Willowbrook turned crisp and sweet as autumn reached its full bloom. Amber leaves clung to tree branches in a final act of grace before fluttering down to carpet the sidewalks. The town square buzzed with preparation, orange lanterns strung between lampposts, bales of hay stacked near the bakery, and hand-painted signs pointing toward booths for cider local crafts, and the beloved pet parade, a tradition Eleanor hadn't seen in over a decade. Willowbrook's annual Harvest Festival had always been a quiet event, nothing flashy, nothing grand. But for a town that carried its seasons like slow verses of a poem, it was something to look forward to. This year, for the first time since Harold's death, Eleanor planned to attend. On the morning of the festival, the sky was undecided. Clouds loomed above like curious onlookers, and a damp mist hovered, unsure if it wanted to become rain. Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the folds of a soft gray coat. Her hair, freshly brushed and tucked into a knit beanie, framed her lined face like early snow on an old roof, gentle, honest, and still standing. Sonny sat at her feet, wearing the yellow scarf Emma had gifted him the night before. It was a simple piece of fabric, with little stitched acorns in the corners, but it made him look festive, almost regal. He tilted his head as Eleanor checked her reflection. "I look ridiculous," she muttered. Sonny wagged his tail. Charlie waited on the porch, his cheeks flushed from excitement. He wore a checkered flannel shirt and a too large raincoat that Emma had lent him. His hair, slightly longer now, poked out beneath a wool cap. In his hand, he held a paper program for the festival, already folded and creased from rereading. "Sonny's leading the parade," he announced proudly as Eleanor stepped out. "He's in the first group." Eleanor smiled. "I hope he doesn't upstage the mayor." Charlie grinned. "He definitely will." They walked together toward the town square, passing neighbors already setting up booths and adjusting umbrellas. Rain had begun to drizzle in a polite, non-committal way, enough to dampen sleeves, but not enough to cancel the event. Eleanor paused near the cider stand, where Emma stood, ladling steaming drinks into compostable cups. Her red curls were pinned up today, and she wore an apron with a stitched maple leaf over her chest. Emma waved, then handed Charlie a cup of cider and tousled his hair with her free hand. "You two look wonderful. Sonny's the star," Eleanor replied. I heard Emma said, smiling, "He's leading the rescue dogs. You should be proud." From the center of the square, a soft melody began to play violin and harmonica joined by the low hum of conversation and the occasional bark. Children ran in loops around hay bales, while older townsfolk sat bundled in the chairs, sipping cider and clapping slowly to the rhythm. Rick arrived moments later, wearing a navy blue coat and carrying an umbrella big enough for three. He looked freshly shaven, and his eyes lit up when he spotted Eleanor. "Fancy seeing you here," he teased. "You're late?" she replied, though her voice was warm. He handed her the umbrella and adjusted the knit cap on her head with surprising tenderness. "There. Now you're ready." The crowd gathered near the main street as the pet parade began. Sonny trotted proudly at the front, flanked by two smaller mutts wearing matching scarves. Behind them followed a long line of animals, rescued dogs, a few cats and strollers, one large tortoise named Milton, with a handmade flag taped to his shell. The parade was more charming than coordinated, but no one cared. Charlie stood near the curb with Emma, who kept one hand gently on his shoulder. His eyes followed Sonny with unblinking joy, and when the golden retriever paused in front of them for a quick tail wag, Charlie waved with both hands. Eleanor watched it all from a few steps back. Her chest felt strange, tight, and light at the same time. For a moment she closed her eyes and simply listened. Children laughing, paws tapping against pavement. Emma's soft voice explaining something to Charlie, and Rick humming along with the band. She opened her eyes and caught Rick watching her. What she asked, nothing he said. "You just look like someone who remembers how to live." She didn't reply, but her hand found his, and neither of them let go. As the parade looped back toward the town hall, a gentle round of applause rose. Rain misted over the scene like a veil of silver, but no one left. Eleanor turned to Emma. "Are there more events? Just the photo booth and the community pie table," Emma said. "But they're probably already out of pecan." Charlie looked at Eleanor. "Do you like pie?" "I love pie," she said, "especially if someone else made it." They walked together, all five of them, Eleanor, Rick, Charlie, Emma, and Sonny, toward the makeshift pie station, which sat under a wide tent, lined with string lights and fall leaves. Eleanor didn't eat much pie that night. Instead, she stood beside her friends, listened to their stories, and watched Charlie take his first picture in a photo booth. It was grainy and slightly tilted, but he was smiling a full, toothy, unguarded smile. Sonny sat in the frame beside him, tongue-out scarf, soaked. Later, as they returned home, Eleanor whispered to Sonny, "You led more than a parade today." That night she opened her journal and wrote, "Today the town woke up." I think I did too. It rained, but no one cared. We laughed, we clapped, we shared pie. And for a moment, it felt like everything broken had finally stopped aching. Winter in Willowbrook arrived without flourish. No blizzards, no ice storms. Just a quiet deepening of cold and a sky that turned a softer shade of gray. The leaves were gone. The streets, once golden and crisp, were now lined with bare branches and frosted grass. But Eleanor's home, the small blue cottage on the edge of town, felt warmer than ever. Sonny lay curled at her feet, his golden coat a contrast against the worn rug by the fireplace. The yellow scarf from the festival still hung on the back of the chair, faded slightly from rain and time. A kettle simmered on the stove. On the small writing desk by the window, Eleanor sat with a fountain pen in hand, her back straight, a blanket draped across her lap. A sheet of cream stationery rested in front of her, the top already filled with her careful handwriting. She paused, glancing out the window. Light filtered in through thin clouds falling in slanted rays across the floor. She lowered her eyes to the paper again and resumed writing. "Dear Willowbrook Animal Rescue. My name is Eleanor Grace. I am writing not out of obligation but out of a quiet promise I made to honor something that changed me. Several months ago, a golden retriever wandered into my life. He had no collar, no name I knew, just soft eyes, wet fur, and the weight of something unspoken. I later learned his name had once been Cooper, but to me, he became Sonny. At first I thought I was doing the rescuing. I fed him, gave him a place to sleep, kept him warm. But the truth is he found me when I was barely here at all. You see, I had slipped into the kind of silence people mistake for contentment. My husband passed years ago. My son is far away. I had grown small in my own home. Then Sonny laid his head on my knee in the rain and stayed. He didn't ask for anything. He just stayed, and something in me woke up. Thanks to him, I now walk every day. I bake again. I write again. I laugh with my neighbors. I hosted a gathering this fall, something I haven't done since my husband was alive. There is a boy named Charlie who visits each day, and I believe Sonny has given him hope too. He has a quiet past, that child. But he smiles now, and I smile with him. I wanted you to know that whatever you did for that little dog, however long he stayed in your care before wandering away, he carried something with him when he left. Something steady. Something kind. Something we needed. I once believed I had disappeared from the world, but a dog didn't forget me, and in return, I remembered how to live. With love and deepest thanks, Eleanor Grace. She set the pen down and breathed in slowly. It wasn't just a letter, it was a vow, a silent promise to never again let the days pass without noticing them. Behind her, the front door creaked open. Miss Eleanor Charlie called. In here, she replied, folding the letter and slipping it into an envelope. Charlie stepped in, cheeks red from the wind, Sonny trotting happily behind him. Emma followed, her arms full of groceries. Her long red coat was dusted with snow, and her smile lit the room like another window. I brought carrots and pie crust, Emma announced, and Charlie helped carry the apples. Rick entered last, holding a stack of logs under one arm. His thick gray scarf was crooked, his gloves mismatched. She's making pie again. That's always a good sign. Eleanor stood and took the pie crust, placing it on the counter. Let's make it together. The kitchen came alive. Charlie peeled apples at the table, occasionally feeding slices to Sonny. Emma stirred cinnamon and sugar with flour. Rick lit the fireplace, humming one of Harold's old jazz tunes. Eleanor worked among them, all her hands steady, her face glowing with quiet joy. Later, after the pie had cooled and been half devoured, Emma set up her old instant camera on the porch railing. Group photo, she declared. No arguing. They arranged themselves on the porch steps. Eleanor in the center, Charlie on one side, Rick on the other. Emma knelt just beside the camera, arms stretched out for the shutter. Sonny lay at Eleanor's feet, his head resting across her shoes, as if he knew this moment mattered. The shutter clicked. The photo emerged, warming in Emma's hand. As the image slowly appeared, blurred edges, imperfect light, but full of life. Charlie held it gently when it dried. We should hang this next to the other one. Eleanor nodded, her voice catching slightly. Yes, this one too is a piece of my heart. As twilight settled, the house remained full of laughter, of soft conversation, of the clink of dishes and the crackle of fire. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, but inside, time didn't feel like something to race or fear. It felt like something to hold. Sonny dozed beside the hearth, his body rising and falling in a rhythm that matched Eleanor's breath. No longer strangers, no longer forgotten, just together. The smallest act of kindness can change not just a moment, but a life. In our busy world, we often forget how much just being there for someone matters. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. What was a small moment in your life that made a big difference? Let us know in the comments below.